Pompeo, a Fox News contributor. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us. This is an astonishing thing, a moment that we are watching unfold in China. I guess the most important question in many ways is, what does President Xi do? What does he do next?
Well, Martha, it's great to be with you. It is truly remarkable to see these protests calling out Xi Jinping directly himself. After just a month ago, he was given essentially a term for life. I think people could see that. As I said back in May of 20, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't represent the people of China, the 900 million people who just want a little bit more freedom. I fear that what Xi will do is what the Chinese Communist Party leaders like Mao have always done. They've used force, they've used brutality to quell these uprisings and to restore order and power. I hope our administration will do everything within its power to prevent that from happening. I hope the world will rise up and recognize the real risks that are happening inside of China as a result of this communist rule that's impacted us all.
Yeah, I think when you look around the world right now and you see the incredible courage on the part of protesters in China, also in Iran, we're going to speak to Masih Alinejad in a little while, and I think of the Ukrainians as well, who are pushing back against Vladimir Putin. This is an extraordinary thing that's happening in all three of these countries. So I guess one of the questions is, are we seeing something different here? And no doubt there will be a crackdown. We have an image from Tiananmen Square, which, those of us who are old enough to remember that, that's pretty much the last time I can remember seeing anything like this in China, Secretary.
Yeah, no, that would include me. I remember 1989 very well. I remember how the administration responded as well, making clear our expectations for how they would treat their own people and the support we provided to them. I hope the Biden administration will do the same thing. You're right. I think these regimes often seem sturdy and strong and eternal, and yet they're deeply fragile. The deal that had been made, right, was that they'd have a better economy and they'd give up some political freedom. That was essentially the Communist Party's deal for the Chinese people. And when you begin to lock them down, right, from the very place that 3 years ago this month, the Chinese Communist Party knew they had a virus unleashed, November of 19, unleashed inside the country. They've been locked down since then. It is a set of failed policies, and now it's coming back to haunt the very administration that caused what's been foisted upon the world.
I'm going to come right back to you, sir. Secretary Pompeo, you can take any one of those questions, whichever one jumps out to you the most. But I do want to hear from you on Venezuela and also what I would consider to be a very tepid response of support for the Chinese people who are protesting.
Yeah, Martha, the White House has been pretty weak. I hope they will gather themselves and understand what's at stake here. The president went and visited with Xi Jinping in Bali just a couple weeks back, and he was saying, well, we're not going to be involved in a Cold War. We want better relations. We can all now see what the Chinese Communist Party has wrought upon the world, and they ought to support the Chinese people in all of their peaceful efforts to gain just a little more freedom for themselves. And as for Venezuela, I think Peter's question nailed it. This is a ludicrous policy. When they keep shouting 9,000, 9,000, 9,000 permits, we all know. We know this administration is telling capital not to go into the fossil fuel markets. We know they've imposed ESG rules. We know the Biden administration has said no more drilling, and yet somehow a tyrant's permitted to produce his oil and ship it here. That's a good thing. It is a silly policy. It is dangerous for the United States of America to be supporting someone like Maduro, who's in league with Iran, who's in league with the Russians and the Chinese. They have it all backwards, Martha.
So the Wall Street Journal wrote today, Biden's dirty oil deal with Venezuela, saying the U.S. government thinks you're a fool. And not only because it waited until Americans were en route to Grandma's house for Thanksgiving to let news slip of a deal to increase heavy crude output from joint ventures controlled by a dictatorship allied with Iran, or that it expects you to believe that Venezuela is considering a return to free elections in exchange. So part of this deal is Venezuela telling us that, we'll be just a little bit more democratic if you just let us, sell you this oil?
Martha, I was involved in the U.S. decision to sanction this Venezuelan crude oil. I was involved in our efforts to support Juan Guaido and the rightful president of Venezuela. They've now turned their back on Guaido and supported Nicolas Maduro. That policy makes no sense for our friends in South America. It makes no sense for the United States. And anyone who believes that because we permitted them to potentially ship a little bit of crude oil, they're going to become more democratic, more free, or Maduro is going to release his grip on power, just doesn't understand what's really taking place, the decimation of Venezuelan people and the harm that it imposes here in the United States as well.
Secretary, thank you very much. Secretary Mike Pompeo.
Yes, ma'am.
Just I want to mention on the way